Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 149. Thank you for joining us. Today, Bonnie and I are joined by Chantal Baros, homeschooling mother and founder of Shining Light Dolls and the Saint Stories for Kids podcast. Chantal shares the inspiration behind her projects with a focus on helping children to grow up with their faith surrounding them and helping them to realize that they are part of a much larger community of faith. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
Hi, Stephen. How's your week going?
Week is going very well. Yes, spring is just around the corner here in Arkansas, so it's a lovely time to be homeschooling.
Definitely, yes. It's a beautiful time of year. Today, we're getting to visit with Chantal Baros, a Catholic homeschooling mom and business owner whose products may very well be in our listeners' homes or on their wish lists right now. She's the founder of Shining Light Dolls and the creator and host of the Saint Stories for Kids podcast. Hi, Chantal, and welcome to the Kolbecast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
I'm so excited to meet you and visit with you. We have many of your dolls in our home. My girls are teenagers now, but I'm not parting with our dolls anytime soon. So that's not even a question. They have been favorites here for a long time.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the opportunity to meet you and visit with you. I understand that you have a background in art and oil portraiture and that you started your company before you had kids, so whom you now homeschool. Would you fill out the picture a bit for us so that we can get to know you a little better?
Yeah, so I started the company actually, it was just the 11th year anniversary of incorporating the business a few days ago.
Oh, wow. So
going at it for 11 years. Thank you. Prior to that, like you mentioned, I was an artist. I did oil painting, portraiture, fine art. So kind of totally different than what I do now with Shining Light Dolls. I live in the Midwest with my husband and our 3 kids, and we homeschool together and work together, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Beautiful. Love it. Well, I'm going to do my best to keep from gushing too much about the dolls, but our elementary school teachers, from what I understand, they're big fans of your St. Maximilian Kolbe doll. If you look closely, he's visible on the new preschool page on the Kolbe website. So I'll put that link in the show notes. So
awesome.
Check him out. Yeah. He's right there on the desk as the teacher's reading to the class. But to that end, would you take us back to the beginning of how Shining Light Dolls came to be?
Yeah. Oh gosh. So back then, I have a brother who's 12 years older than me. So he was starting to have his children. And they asked me to be the godmother, and I was looking around for something that I could buy for them. And particularly for his first son, who is now very big and makes me feel really old. Anyway, so back then I was, in my early 20s or mid 20s, I guess, and a starving artist. As we all know, like oil painters don't make a ton of money. And I was also teaching cake decorating classes. And so I was looking for something that was relevant to children and affordable, but really particularly something that sort of would speak to the heart of a child, and they would feel like it was relevant to them and that it sort of fit into their world, their toy world, right? That it was something that wouldn't be over there on a shelf that they couldn't touch, but that they could feel like it was for them and it was relevant to their life. I also had this idea that giving a child a product, a toy that's made, shows them that there are other people that also buy these things and believe these things. And it shows them that they're part of a community, even if they don't see that community. Because I had in mind a lot of the people that I went to school with who are no longer practicing their faith. And so, things that would have shown them that the faith is still relevant, it's still active, there are people still participating, that it matters, and that people care enough about it to produce things for children. So that was the inspiration of the company. Over the years, it's really grown and changed as I've had my own children. They are like the number one inspiration for what I do now and what I'm creating and how the company has developed. And my customers are also the inspiration, just hearing other moms and becoming a mom and watching my children and how they learn and how they play. It's sort of been like my kids and my business have been growing together side by side.
I love hearing how that came to be. And I'm really curious about your team and all the things between the inspirations that you mentioned and the new products that are now available. But I just love to hear more about it, how that all goes.
So we're still actually a pretty small company team wise. I work with my husband, and one of my best friends actually works with us as well. She handles like customer service and care, and I am the creative side of the business. So I do all of the product development and design, and I write the podcast. And my husband handles a lot of logistics for us. So, dealing with our shipping partner and the stuff that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And he also edits the podcast for us. So we're very much like a family run little business here.
I'm a little curious. I mean, so you gave us a little bit of background, but why a doll in particular, or even what was the first thing, the first doll, what was it?
So the very first doll that I made was Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it was a classic doll. And actually, I designed the first 11 at the same time. So it was the Virgin Mary Around the World collection, and it was the classic dolls. And I really just loved the fact that you can teach children about different cultures and apparitions, or through Marian apparitions, and this idea that, God and Mary and the saints are for everyone, and it's a global community. And I just thought that that was such a beautiful way to sort of approach it. And why did I do the classic dolls? The classic dolls actually were inspired by like a couple different facets of what I was seeing and interested in at that time in my life. So they were inspired by sort of like pop culture collectibles at that time. So I really liked like Sanrio and Funko toys and that sort of things, the little like collectibles. And I thought that it was cool because from the very beginning, I wanted to make sure that they were safe for children from 0 and up. But I thought that they were also cute enough that, you could put it on a desk or collect them as like, in your bedroom, your favorite patron saint. So it was sort of like a toy and like a Funko collectible sort of thing. So yeah, it was the Virgin Mary Around the World were the first 11 dolls that we did.
That's really fun. It's very fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first became aware of them, I was really interested in all of the sort of wood toys and natural rubber toys that they could play with that were safe for them, like you're speaking to. And so when I saw these come along, I was like, oh, this is great how they bring those together. And I find that very interesting, your insight about the products that are available, speaking to the faith that other people share with us, and how it's important enough, it's worth producing them. That's very interesting. I had not really gotten that far.
Yeah, I think that there's something just about like, because I, as an artist, that was my background, and doing, one-off oil paintings, they're very like precious, they're one of a kind. And then I moved into this world of making things that were for a lot of people. But that was very much my intention, was to try to make it like, this is for a lot of people. It's for everyone. We're like all in this together. And I wanted kids to feel like, just like when they go to the store and they see a Barbie, they know that other kids have Barbies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you saw a beautiful little Saint doll in a box, then you have that feeling that it's not just like one of a kind, which is a strange way to say it because we all love one of a kind things and they're beautiful. But in a certain way, it's also important to say like, this is important enough that people are making it on a larger scale, and we're a part of a community, and you're not alone sort of in your faith. And maybe that speaks to sort of like, where I was in my early 20s, watching a lot of people fall away from the church. And I didn't want, my nephews to feel like this is like just our family or just like something that I made for them, which is beautiful. Again, I'm not knocking that, but I wanted it to kind of also feel like there are more of us, we are a community, and it is worth producing for these children to show them that it's worth it and you get these toys. Yeah, it's there's a lot going on in my head for like what I'm thinking about making toys. Yeah, there's a lot of layers, right? There's a lot of layers when you're designing, when you're creating. There's like the business, the social, the religious aspects. We try to like work all of that into what we're doing here.
That was becoming obvious to me as you were talking. It's like, oh, you've got this idea of spreading, making a larger community. Then you pick the Blessed Mother from all of these different parts of the
Yeah.
world, and it's all fitting together for things. That's really, yeah, that's fun.
And it makes all sorts of sense too, we've talked before in previous conversations about surrounding our environments with beautiful things and things that call to mind our faith, and even just living out the faith in a daily manner and putting things in our midst that help us do that. It makes all sorts of sense for young children as well. And of course, we read to them and take them to church and do all those sorts of things. But here it brings it right to where they can experience it. And I hate to use the word normalize, but it's like this puts it front and center. Like, this is very important to us. And here's one way we show that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that actually is a great word, is like normalizing it, right? Like it shouldn't be like weird to be like a Catholic, right? It should be like,
or here's your statue from your baptism and don't touch it. And but it's important, but it's hard. That really kind of brings it down to, it is important, and it's so important that here's this for you to interact with a lot. Yeah, it makes all sorts of sense.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And it can kind of feel sort of like contradictory in a way, because like the articles of our faith are like precious and sacred, and we try to keep them like precious and sacred. But I think that for me personally, the more like I understand about like how children interact with their world and how they learn, like it just makes sense, right? Like children learn through play and they learn through interacting with their environment. So I've had like a complete flip of my viewpoint, right? It was like before, when I first started, it was like, oh, I don't know how people are going to feel about this, like, playing with things that are supposed to be like very precious and very holy. But then, the more that I have learned through research, as, working through this like form of education that we do, and even just as a parent, and I see my kids interacting with their environment and playing, and I'm like, no, this totally makes sense. This is like absolutely a fantastic way to teach them and to let them experience God in their childlike way, right? It's like we want them to have that encounter, and so they need allow them to encounter in the way that makes sense for them is a good thing. It is a holy thing, I think.
Yeah, I remember my youngest son, his name is Elijah, and at one point we had given him a little stuffed raven. And so for forever, then it was, this is my raven, just like Elijah had the ravens come and feed him when and he'd hear the story at mass, and it's like, oh, it's my story. It connects. I can see that it connects them with a saint or with something we want them to be connected to, but they love it and they hold on to that and absorb it. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, it makes it personal, right? It gives them that personal connection to God, to Jesus, to the saints, and it becomes theirs. And I think that that's what really makes something stick, right? It's not like the faith of these like people far away from me or other people's. They get ownership over it, and it just allows God to speak to them in their own personal way, and that's when that relationship starts to be formed. And it's that like relational aspect that I think lasts the longest, right? It's not just like the facts that you learn; it's that relationship that you develop with God that really is what will keep you close to Him.
The most important thing, right? So that is so significant, because as I know, we've talked, I think on our podcast before, about sometimes as Catholics we get a little wrapped up with all of the details, which are all good details. They're all wonderful, but at least for me personally, and I think for many Catholics, we lose that kind of idea. Wait, this is about me and Jesus and me and the saints, and it's about us together. And I can see how that's being encouraged then through this interaction at a young level and encouraged, which is great.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a while ago when we started introducing more like play sets. We started with the dolls, and then I started doing like these wooden play sets last year because of my kids and like the way that they were interacting and like having multiple pieces in it. I did one where it's like a Jesus and St. Peter wave stacker, right? So you get Jesus and you get St. Peter and you get the little waves. And I personally love that, because when I watch my kids interacting with it and they are acting out that Bible story of St. Peter like starting to sink in the water, And it's almost like watching someone participate in a play-based version of like Ignatian contemplation and imaginative prayer, right? You're supposed to like put yourself in that Bible story. And that's literally what the kids are doing. They're entering into that Bible story. And so it's like play prayer, and they don't even like know that they're doing it, right? They don't like take themselves seriously, but they'll say things later to me that are like these beautiful like insights, right? Like, oh, like Peter was scared because he stopped looking at Jesus, like my son said to me. And I was like, yes, like keep your eyes on Jesus, right? Like,
Wow.
and so it's like, yeah, I see it as like a form of prayer for children. They can put themselves either in the lives of the saints or into those Bible stories. And having those tangible manipulatives really helps children with that kind of thing.
The beautiful expressions on their faces, I think, lay such a neat groundwork for these are our friends in heaven and they're praying for us and we can get to know them as people. I just think it's neat. Before we move on, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you manage running your business and homeschooling. It's a family endeavor. Everyone's in it together, which is beautiful. How do you make that work, though? I think we have a lot of families who are wondering.
Yeah. So how do we make it work? Well, it is a family endeavor. So, me and my husband are on the same page, and that really helps a lot. And running the business, well, so I like to think of myself primarily as a mom. That's like my first job. And so um, I like to try to fit the business around my life as a mom. So for me, that looks like I don't spend a lot of time doing like watching TV or having like extracurriculars for myself. Um, I do usually do my work when we have like quiet time. So after our schoolwork is done during quiet time, or I'll wake up early in the morning and work before my kids are awake. And that's just like me. That's like my personal choice, I guess. And also doing it together with my husband really helps too. So sometimes I'll do the homeschool with my son, with my first child, and he'll do the kindergarten and the younger preschool with my two younger children. So that really helps. And yeah, I really like homeschooling. I was thinking about this like sort of in preparation for our speaking with you guys today. And I actually think that it's easier for me to do homeschool than probably a traditional school while running a business because of the flexibility that it offers. We can do the school at whatever time of day we want. We can take days off if we need to, but also just like the day to day, like I'm a very like lazy person. So like having to like get up and like get the kids ready and like go in the car and like drive and like sit in a pickup line, like I just like don't want to do that. And so I love that like homeschool we can just like, have breakfast, it'd be really casual, just like move right into what my son is doing or working on, and the girls, it just feels actually easier to me. So in addition to all the wonderful reasons for homeschooling that we like doing it, but yeah, I actually find it to be easier and work easier with our schedule. There's a lot less I'm big on like time management, right? Because when you have a business and a family, time management matters. And so for me, we're actually saving a lot of time and like not having to drive everyday places, not having to like fight the kids into the car and out of the car. And, it's those like moments that sort of add up that give me the time to, work on the business or cook dinner. And so, yeah, I think it really works for our life.
I found similar. Our kids used to be in parochial school and then we changed to homeschooling, and I found the same to be true. We got a lot of time back. It was logistically simpler
Yeah.
in many ways, and it surprised me, and it surprises people when I tell them that. They're like, how can that be? But I have found it to be very true also. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like unless you're just going to completely say, just delegate parenting to somebody else and teaching that, yeah, there's no way it's going to save time to have somebody else do that, because you still have to get the kids, like all these things that you're saying, but then
Right.
you still have to spend the time engaging, but then you've got to worry about what other people are talking about, what the other children are saying, and at least you have more control over that when you've got your kids at home with you and you can talk about it and expose them to the things that they're ready to be exposed to a little bit more than.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely that as well. Like in addition to all of my like lazy reasons that I just listed.
Not
I,
lazy, ordered.
I really, yeah, like, I really just appreciate like what you were saying, that you can teach your children at the pace that fits your family, expose them to what you want to expose them to, not have to worry about like um, a lot of the crazy stuff that goes on in today's world. And also, we also love it because each one of our children has a different learning style. And so we're able to tailor it to their needs. Like they're completely different. And that was such a fun experience as a mom to see that, right? That like, even though they're the same children raised in the same home, like we've controlled the variables, they're very different
Yeah.
and they have different learning styles. And it's so wonderful to be able to give them each what they need and have that flexibility and even the flexibility to change the program from year to year based on like their needs. So yeah, we actually really love it. Like it really fits with our our like family culture and our logistics, like you were saying, with owning a business.
And then the podcast. So the podcast came after the dolls came into being. So
Mhm.
how did you decide, I'm going to do a podcast now? How'd that work?
Yeah, so absolutely that was inspired by my son. So I started the podcast when he was I actually don't remember how old he was. He was a toddler. Sometimes where he was a toddler, or maybe he was like in maybe kindergarten, somewhere around there. It's been a while. But when he was a toddler, so the inspiration started when he was a toddler. When he was a toddler, he loved listening. He is an auditory learner. And so he loved listening to story podcasts for children. So while I was like doing dishes or, making dinner, he would be like puttering around in his play kitchen and I would put on stories for him to listen to. And he would just listen and listen and listen. And on the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, I was like telling him the story in the kitchen. And I was like, oh, you know what? I wonder if there's like a podcast version of this story. I'm sure there must be. Like, that would be great for you to listen to. This is like your favorite thing. So I went to the iTunes store and I was looking at the podcast and I couldn't find a story of Our Lady of Guadalupe for kids. And I was like, oh, that's a really like that's something that like I really want for kids. Like I could do that. And then I didn't do it for a year because I really didn't feel qualified. I was like, I'm not a podcaster. I'm not like a voice actor. No one wants to listen to my voice telling stories. So that was I was like, oh, I can't do it. Like I said at the beginning, like very introverted. I did not want to like put myself out there in a podcast.
Yeah.
But after a year, I was like, it just like kept coming back, right? Like it kept coming back. Like the Holy Spirit was like, come on, you got to do it. Like give it a go, give it a go. And so finally, a year later, I wrote the first one, and we started recording. And yeah, so it was my son once again. He was my inspiration, and most of my things are either my children or my customers. It's like or my kids are like, Mom, I want this, or I see them interacting with something, or my customers are like, Hey, we want this, or I hear them like, talking about what they need and what they're looking for as parents. So yeah, it was my son, and I'm really glad that I did give it a go. We've had like millions of listens now to the podcast, and it's, I think, a resource that I love being able to give to people because these are like our collective stories. And so being able to like share them with children has been like really gratifying.
I found them great for supplementing our homeschool studies. When we were driving to parochial school, we would listen to those a lot, and we would be able to queue one up for the whatever feast day was happening. You have quite the collection of them, so I've really enjoyed listening to them, and they're beautifully produced too. With you've got background music and sound effects.
Thank you. Yeah, that's just my husband. Like we're very like we just like record it in one of our bedrooms, and then my husband edits it. So it's amazing what God can do. Like even with your like very poorly poorly done efforts, like God is really amazing in that way. We rely a lot here on like the Holy Spirit. I'm very much like running my business like Jesus, like take the wheel. Like I don't know what I'm doing.
And look what beauty has come from it.
Thank you.
Are you still developing podcast episodes? You're still working on that?
Yeah, we are. So the original podcast schedule was that I was matching it to feast days that would be coming up in the liturgical calendar. And like after a couple of years, you sort of like hit like the bottom barrel of like
Yeah, that's hard.
obscurity, right? Like where you're like, okay, we've already done like the really well-known things, and now I'm like going really far back here. Which has actually been really fun. So we're still trying to do it that way, and then we're also trying to add in something, some podcasts that are more like seasonal, right? So like Lent episodes we have going up right now, and we might do something with like a little bit of a different theme, right? So that it maybe we'll do like a summer theme or something like that. But the original series were all based on the liturgical calendar.
And so when you're developing new dolls, are you thinking what the podcast for that doll will be as well? Are they tied to new somehow, or?
They're not. Like I wish I was more coordinated, but they're not. The I'm just kidding. No, the podcast was absolutely sort of like living through the liturgical year and kind of celebrating the feast days of the saints. And then, because I like to think of it sort of like the person that is maybe purchasing something has a different need than the person who is listening to the podcast. And so here we have sort of like celebrating the feast through their stories. And I always try to, fit in like a Catholic like moral teaching at the end or something, to tie with like the moral of the story. And then the products, like I said, are sort of maybe they're focused on a need of a parent, right? So like we did like water cards for church, right? Because we spoke to our parents and I said like, what's your pain point? What's your biggest pain point as a Catholic parent? And they're like sitting through mass with children. And so I came up with like the water cards. They're like alphabet water cards where it's like an item in the church. So the physical products and the podcast are sort of like different like mental venues that I'm like running down. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, our kids are teenagers now, and so I have admired your products for a long time, and we have many of the early ones, and I shop them for my nieces who are younger. But it's neat to hear about so much else that has been going on with your company and all you have in development. And when I've been preparing for this episode and seen, you have blankets and the wooden toys that you have, and all the beautiful things, and even fabric on Spoonflower. I thought that was really fun to see the fabric you have there. And so I'm just happy for you to see how it has grown from the time that I was delighted to find your stuff when my kids were little and see how it has come so far.
Thank you so much.
I'd love to talk some more about play-based learning and incorporating it into daily liturgical life. What do you mean when you say that? And what does that look like for you guys and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So obviously my kids do have a lot of my toys, all of them, because I'm their mom.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So for them, it does look like, they snuggle their stuffies at bedtime, right? So for like daily, I would call it like daily Catholic life, right? Like we have our plushies that we snuggle. My son has his Saint Raphael because he was having nightmares. So he requested a Saint Raphael plushie because he's the patron saint of nightmares. So it looks like, it looks like playtime, right? And even aside from like products, right? Even aside from physical toys, I think sometimes play can take a lot of different forms for children. So it can be imaginative play where they're doing like role playing. That was actually one of the reasons, another thing that I really like about the podcast and the stories is that when you give a child a story, they can then sort of act out that story, right? If you've ever like seen a kid watch like one of their favorite TV shows and then they go and like pretend to be that character and act it out in role play. And so I really like that aspect of the stories is that sort of like they can become that person and do that role play activity. I actually saw in one of my son's books that Saint Teresa of Avila used to do like role play of pretending to be like a hermit, and then she would like build like little hermitages and wanted to be like a saint that way. And so it can look like that, right? It can look like pretending to be a hermit, right? And building a little fort out of sticks. It can look like pretending that you're St. George battling a dragon with a stick for a sword, and like one of your siblings is probably going to be the dragon. So that's like role play, right? And that's like daily sort of incorporating the lives of the saints into their sort of imagination, right? The imagination of the child. And then as far as like incorporating into like special feast days and seasons. Actually, that's a great example is like St. George, right? And the dragon, and the sword. There's another feast day, Michaelmas, right? And we had like a Catholic play group that we were part of, and we would do like a St. Michaelmas bonfire, and the kids would wear little capes and pretend they're archangels and carry around the sticks. And so, they remember that and they remember those moments they remember those feast days and they ask about them. Even when you think that it's just like one day, one play group and they're little and they don't remember, but they do. Like the next year, they're like, are we going to go and like have the capes and the swords? Like that was so much fun. And they remember those special feast days when they are, experiencing it through like that lens of childhood. So yeah, it's like it's bringing it in these like simple ways. And I think stories are the best way to like sort of, spark that imagination and then kind of see where the kids take it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting as you were talking about that, because I was certainly one of those boys who just was in my head imagining I was whatever. And I was, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, I mean, Star Wars is nice, but I mean, I probably, it would be better to have been Saint Michael rather,
Yeah.
well, I can be Luke Skywalker for a little bit and then be Saint Michael, but to have that material to basically be thinking about and practicing and such is really wonderful.
Yeah. And so with play-based learning, one of the sort of like important things is sort of framing it for children, right? Like an example would be you like tell them the story, and then maybe before you had told them the story, you would like lay out some materials for them to encounter when they're done hearing the story so that they can sort of interact with it. And that can look like things that you find around your house, or it can look like, specific toys. But yeah, it's almost like guided imaginative play. So you give the story and then you sort of like lay some groundwork there, and then you kind of let the Holy Spirit like take them where they may, right? Are they gonna choose to be, St. Peter in the story? Or are they going to choose to be Jesus in the story? Where is their imagination leading them today? I produce toys for kids for Catholic play-based learning, but I think that you can do it with other things like in your home too, right? Like you can take like your blocks, and this was actually a really fun one for the Feast of St. Teresa of Avila. She talks about the seven interior castles. And so we took the kids like blocks and we made like little circular castles, right? One inside the other. And then we put one figure in the middle and we put St. Teresa on the outside. And we said like, Teresa believes that the key to getting to Jesus, who's in the center of these castles, is prayer, and it unlocks the door. So every time like you sort of go further in, you get like closer to those glimpses of God who's at the center of the castle. And the kids really loved it. Like they loved that I was like sitting on the floor with them and we made these like circular castles. And, it was this like really beautiful way for them to visualize this like theological concept that probably a kid that age is not usually even hearing, right? Like, yeah. What like my 5-year-old was like, yeah, like Jesus is at the center of the interior castle, right? Like that's not something that you would hear, but because we were doing it in a play way, they totally like got it and they were excited about it and interested in it. So yeah, I think it's really fun, and it's a great way also I think for parents to engage with their children in their faith life, because children love to be played with too. So when you take that time to play with them, that also I think reinforces the message of whatever you're playing and talking about.
Those little minds, I was just thinking they're going to put their imagination to work in some way or another. So it's nice when you can focus on something that's worth them thinking about and imagining and such, and participating in it shows that it's not just something for kids either. It's something that we should all be focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's also finding ways to play like that has also enriched, I think, my own life and my own like prayer life, because when you sort of like see the faith again through the eyes of a child and you sort of are like almost like re-educating yourself, it's been like a beautiful experience, like to be able to do this with my children. It's been very enriching for me as well in my own spiritual life, because Jesus says to be childlike. And so it's good for the whole family, honestly. Like it's been good for all of us.
Do you ever encounter folks who are kind of iffy on the idea of playing? They have a hard time getting to that place where they feel comfortable engaging in the play with them or with their kids?
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely like sometimes some like hesitation. And I think specifically we have like sometimes over the years I've encountered people who are specifically hesitant about the idea of like play-based learning when it comes to theology or religion. You know, we talked about how there's this idea that it's like very, and it's very like sacred and holy and not to be like, you know, made fun, right? But
Yeah.
that's not what playing is. Playing isn't like making fun of something. It's encountering it just in the way that makes sense to the mind of a child, right? Sort of like Saint Teresa of Avila trying to be a hermit. Like that wasn't because she was like making light of it. It was because in her little world, she took it very seriously and really wanted to do that. And that's how she was showing it. But I think that over the years, you know, when we first started the company, there was absolutely a lot of hesitancy, right, about this idea of like Catholic toys. And over the last 11 years, a lot has changed. And I think that people see that it works, right? And so they are like, oh, but maybe it's not bad. And I actually had an experience like that myself. I decided to make for the first time like a wooden mass set, like a wooden mass kit, right? So you have like chalice, a paten, a little, you know, Eucharist. And um at first I was like, I don't know about this, right? Like this is something like very, very precious, very sacred. And I don't want it to be seen as like making light of it. But I got my prototype in the mail and I put it on the table and my son started interacting with it. And he took so much more interest in that in the sacrifice of the mass, right? He was like suddenly like putting himself in the role of the priest and interacting with these items. And now he knew the names of everything. And a few weeks after we got the prototype in, my father-in-law actually passed away. And about a week after that happened, my son was like having a rough time with it. And he actually offered like a little funeral mass,
Mm.
like in our living room. And it was really beautiful because you could see that he was processing that loss through the lens of his faith. And that was like really significant for me. And it made me realize like, wow, like it isn't just like a toy for him. It's actually helping him to sort of like process this in a way that, you know, makes sense and through the lens of like his faith. And it was really actually quite beautiful. And so I decided to make that product based on watching my son interact with it because I was like, well, you know, we're super Catholic, right? We're like uber Catholics. Like I own like a Catholic business. You have like every Catholic toy out there. um, and yet, you know, bringing this in here and allowing you to interact with it, it totally changed his attention at that part of the mass. It changed like his knowledge of those items. And then it also was super significant that he knew that he could like that the mass mattered in your processing of like grief. And it was really, yeah. So based on watching my own son, I decided to produce that product because I was like, well, there might be some pushback. Maybe some people aren't comfortable with the idea of playing with some of these items, but yeah, it just made sense for me. It just clicked that it meant something. And I know now that he's internalized that super important part of our faith, if not the most important, you know, part of our faith. He's internalized it and owned it in a way that I don't know, you know, how long it would have taken him to do that in another way.
Yeah, it's almost like a question of, is this, it's no less reverent.
Exactly.
We're not being irreverent.
Correct.
By
Yeah.
playing like that. And we hear so much like play is the work of the child, or that's how children learn. So
Yeah.
there's still reverence there. And the way that we show up to that can convey that reverence even as we're like working with them, using them.
Yeah. Exactly. He played with it reverently too. Like that was the interesting thing to watch is like, you know, he like you could see him like trying to like be like, you know, like our priest, right? Like he got like very serious and he was taking himself very seriously. It was actually super sweet and really beautiful that he understood that should be interacted with like in this reverent way. And even just like thinking of it from that perspective, I really kind of like the fact that he was putting himself in the priest's shoes, right? He was pretending to be a priest, right? Like we let our kids pretend anything else, right? We pretend to be like superheroes or farmers or, you know, race car drivers, but like how wonderful it was to let him pretend to be a priest, which is such an important job. And it's a we pretend play all these other roles in society. Why not one of the most important, which is like, the priest who offers this holy sacrifice of the Mass. So it was really lovely.
Yeah, definitely sounds successful when you're incorporating all of that faith into their daily life, where so often we just have a tendency to have a break, where it's kind of like, well, Mass is what we do on Sunday or whenever we can happen to get to. We don't have a whole lot of weekday masses here in rural Arkansas, but but to have that, as you're saying, the processing of the grief be part of turning to the faith, that being incorporated at such a young age is really, really nice, because that doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen that you have that connection. It can sometimes be too separate, but
yeah.
That I guess that normalizing word, which I don't love it, but it seems to fit for now, that this is how, just to bring it to where that's what he thought to do when he was missing his grandfather.
Yeah, and I think that as adult Catholics, we have those things, right? We have sacramentals as adult Catholics, right? We can light a candle, use holy water, we have our rosaries, we have all of these tangible things. And so I think that the kids obviously have those too, except for candles, but giving them things that represent their faith to them, that they can interact with and like process, I think is really helpful. And whether it's like the highs and lows of life, or even just learning lessons or whatever, it's nice to give them physical things that they can interact with, because we are physical creatures, right? So it's a really nice way to sort of give the kids something to interact with. And I actually want to mention this, since I said the candle thing. One of the most successful products that we released last year was an Advent wreath. And it's an Advent wreath that kids can like take a little wooden disc and light and unlight it, right? And they love that. They love interacting with that. And so it's just those moments where you're sort of like allowing them that interaction with those those articles of faith, whether it's like a little candle, because they love lighting candles at church, so they can like, light this, unlight this without harming themselves. Put it together, sort of build a wreath, change the candles, light and unlight. It allows them to enter into their faith level. They don't have to wait till they're grown up, right? They don't have to wait till it's safe for them to play with fire, to touch a very precious statue or whatever. They can enter right into it at that child level.
That's really neat.
Thank you. That was also inspired by my son. So one of the candles that's coming is it has the eternal rest prayer on the back, right? Because sometimes when someone passes, you can say a prayer for them and light a candle. And so I like the idea of being able to just give it to my kids and not have to worry about like them setting the house on fire. But that way they can, interact with it when they feel like they want to like light a candle, say a prayer, right? Because that's always my kids' favorite part of church, is like lighting the candles at the end for people, like the little votive candles. So bringing that home and letting them be able to do that on their own level, next to their bedside, whatever, and learn the prayer at the same time, right? Take a moment to pray and sort of incorporate that prayer into the physical act of interacting with the candle.
I think it would probably also relieve a lot of stress that we tend to have when we do have candles around the table with my children, both young and old. It's how many times are we going to blow out the candles, wax all over the place? This way, just use these. Use these when you want to do candles.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, so as we're reaching the end of our conversation, which has just been wonderful, I've really enjoyed it so much. Do you have any takeaways you want to leave with our listeners?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I think my biggest takeaway, since I own a company that like makes physical things, I think that my takeaway would be not necessarily that I'm trying to push my things, but that I think that the idea of playing with your children in a faith-based way is really beautiful and enriching, and you can do it for free, and you can do it with things around your home. Sometimes it just requires like a little creative thinking, telling that story, and then laying out some things that maybe match what you're working with. So that's my takeaway. Like give a try to play-based learning for your faith and have fun with it.
That's fabulous. Good deal. Well, we have sure enjoyed our time visiting with you. I'm so glad I got to meet you today and get to know you a little bit and hear more about your business, and wish you all the best as it continues, and all the best to your family. Thanks so much, Chantal, for coming to visit with us.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed my time today.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.